This session, as probably all of you know, is co-sponsored by the Center for Ethics and the Center for Teaching. This is a series that we have done. This is one of 4 this year, and there were 4 last year. This year we have taken as a common theme issues of technology and education. We have 3 panelists. I will introduce them and then turn the program over to Susan Schoenbaum, who is the program coordinator at the Center for Ethics, who will moderate the program. Patricia Armstrong is the one sitting in the middle. She is she's assistant director at the Center for Teaching and a senior lecturer in the Department of French and Italian. In the center, she liaisons with people in arts and science, teachers and of all levels in arts and science, in the humanities division, in divinity school, and in the graduate school of religion, with law, the central library, and with Vanderbilt Visions. And if she has any time left over, she also works frequently and carefully with TAs who come from outside the United States and who are teaching in the college. She is also a frequent and very effective advisor to us in the Center for Teaching. Matt Hall is Assistant Vice Chancellor for ITS, an Associate Chief Information Architect, Enterprise Infrastructure. He is a faculty fellow in the English department, and he works closely with faculty and researchers to find ways in which technology can better enable learning, collaboration, and research. He has co-taught in the English department, or was this solo course, the Worlds of
that was Professor Clayton and I did that together.
The freshman seminar?
Yes, sir.
Writing seminar on the Worlds of Wordcraft. Now, you all are teaching or have taught this learning in a digital age.
We have taught.
You have taught that course. I don't know whether it's going on this semester or not. And Matt has also co-taught a course, Beyond the One-Way Web, in engineering school. He serves on advisory boards to AT&T, Sprint, Verizon. He has a remarkable background in the area of computer learning and computer architecture. And he also, and significantly, is a deputy sheriff in Williamson County. Jay Clayton is the William R. Keenan Jr. Professor of English and chair of that department. And among his many awards that are relevant for us, in addition to a Guggenheim, is the National Institutes of Health in the Division of Genome Research, a grant that he got for genetics, a research project, genetics in literature, film, and popular culture. He has a freshman seminar called Hypertext, Reading and Writing Online. And he has another course called Postmodernism and the Culture of Cyberspace. One of his most recent of his 6 books has the title Charles Dickens in Cyberspace.
Very good book.
The Afterlife of the 19th Century in Postmodern Culture. All of these people have a variety of experiences and perspectives on technology and relation education with a variety of backgrounds and concerns. And so we're looking forward to it. I turn it now over to capable hands of Susan Schoenbaum.
I also want to welcome you today to our program. And I just wanted to sort of orient you to the kind of questions that we're going to attempt to address today. And I really want to put an emphasis on the conversational aspect of this program. So the kinds of questions that we're asking today are what are the responsibilities of faculty members in relation to their students who may have a very different level of expertise around technology issues than the faculty member of him or herself. And what are the kinds of advantages and disadvantages of incorporating all of these different kinds of technologies that are available, computer technologies in particular, available to us increasingly in this digital age, and how are we going to think about all of that in relation to the particular disciplines that we all teach. Teaching different disciplines calls for different kinds of pedagogical techniques and so on. So what we're going to do now is ask Patricia to start, and each of our panelists will speak for about 10 minutes. And then, you know, if you want to talk together a little bit after all of you have spoken, that's fine, but then we will open it up to questions and comments and suggestions on the part of everyone else who is here. So with that, I will turn it over to Patricia.
Thank you. I just want to preface my remarks by saying, as always, it's so great to be here and to see so many people from a variety of disciplines and ranks within the university. I think that the series last year and this year, both of them have really brought together people who wouldn't necessarily be together in the same room, and that's one of the things that I love about being here. But it's the first time I'm a panelist. I'm normally in Susan's role, so this is a little bit of a change for me. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to recount why and how I've incorporated various technologies into my teaching, results both from my perspective as a professor and also from students so their perspectives on this incorporation, and conclusions that I've drawn from incorporating technology into my classroom and responses to this incorporation. And I'm going to bookend my remarks with two anecdotes. So the first anecdote is from fall 2005, when I was teaching French 201, which is considered in the department a pretty difficult and demanding course to teach because it has two goals that don't really overlap that much. One of them is to really solidify in our students who are entering the major a real grasp of the nuances of French grammar, and the second is to introduce them to the conventions of writing in French. And there is some overlap. You have to be able to use grammatical structures in order to write effectively, but there's not a lot of overlap. And so you really feel like I have discovered in teaching that course that I feel very pressed for time. And so I made the decision in fall 2005 that I would, in a very minimal way, incorporate a very basic technology into the classroom, and that's PowerPoint, and for a very particular reason. I find that when I'm teaching grammatical concepts, it's very helpful to show students examples of sentences and phrases with those concepts and those structures in action, in practice. And I felt like I was wasting a lot of time in class coming up with those examples, writing them on the board, making sure that I had written everything correctly. And so I thought it would be so much more efficient for me to create examples ahead of time and simply just to project them at the appropriate time in my explanation of a grammatical concept. I also thought that I would probably do a better job of coming up with better sentences if I were doing it in advance of the class and not on the cuff. So after about 4 to 5 weeks of doing this, I did a midterm evaluation with my students, which I always do, and I actually do it about twice, so about 4 to 5 week mark and about the 9 to 10 week mark. And I asked them just to comment on aspects of the class that were helping them to learn and things they would suggest changing. And it was pretty clear from the suggestions for change that I should cut out using PowerPoint to teach grammar. And I'm going to give you the first quote, citation from this set of evaluations, which is PowerPoint really the best way to teach grammar? And to which I didn't even have to respond because the second student's comment, to my perspective, served as a response. Quote, I think she should just teach. And so my interpretation of those two responses that were borne out by other student responses is that I couldn't just teach from their perspective when I was trying to use this technology, and from their point of view, not in a particularly effective way. So my analysis of that, and I stopped doing it, by the way. My analysis of why it didn't work for students is that it wasn't just the right move for me. I tend to be very dynamic in the classroom. I tend to have a lot of interaction with my students, and I actually think that my moving to and from the board to actually write sentences on the board was very dynamic. I could also create sentences that riffed on things that students had just said, or we could kind of develop a theme for the day. And so I think that they really missed, without knowing it, the Patricia who's very dynamic and very spontaneous and very reactive to students. So I still believe that I did it for the right reason, just not with the results I would have liked. So that did not dissuade me from the next time I taught. I did not teach in fall 2006. And as a parenthesis, we in the Center for Teaching teach one course a year generally. So this long break between teaching is normal for us. So last time I taught was last semester, fall 2007, still in the French department, and this time an upper level seminar in 17th century French literature, which is my field of specialty. And of course I used Blackboard. I just want to say that it goes without saying that I used Blackboard as a very convenient way of gathering course materials, disseminating assignments, just for very basic course management purposes. I also, on Oak, posted images of Louis XIV. The title of this course was The Age of Louis XIV. And as I found images that I wanted to discuss in class, I would post them there so students could look at them before class. And additionally, I decided to incorporate 17th century wall calendars into my class this past fall. And these wall calendars clearly cannot be taken from the archives to the United States. And so what I had done in summer 2007 had gone and selected about 10 images and paid for digital reproductions of them, and then posted them on our course website. And of course, that was so much more effective than had I made photocopies for students, because we were able to zoom in on particular details. There's very, very tiny writing when it's that small that they were able to then blow up, and then they could make sure that they understood it. They could check in with me. So, and I found that was very effective, and actually used those almanacs in an assignment. Another way that I used something, or that students used it to great effect, was that we read probably 2 to 3 dozen fables by La Fontaine. And a couple of years ago, I had just happened to, somebody sent me an email, not just me, but other people, saying that there was a website where every single fable by La Fontaine is available, recited out loud. And so I let my students know about this website and recommended that they consult it while they were reading the fables that I had assigned for class. And many of them reported that hearing the fable in addition to reading it really helped their comprehension. This is extraordinarily difficult French. It's poetic, it has archaic constructions. La Fontaine works pretty hard to be very obscurant in places, and for very political reasons. And so hearing these fables by a Francophone speaker was really crucial for some of them to actually get the meaning. The other thing that I would point out that I thought was very successful is that I assigned Tartuffe and discovered that in the Vanderbilt library, and even via Amazon.com, there weren't particularly good versions to show my students. And the best version I knew of was actually a student production of the opera based on the play that was presented last February. So I contacted the faculty member who had directed the production, asked for permission to upload. I didn't do the uploading, but to have the DVD of it uploaded so that my students could then watch it for an assignment. And it was a choice that only 2 out of 15 chose, because I gave them lots of choices for their final paper. But the 2 students who did choose to do a review of that particular production did an extraordinary job, and such a good job that I'm definitely going to keep it as that assignment as a possibility for future assignments, but some of the other ones that weren't as successful, I won't. And I was able to do that. I couldn't transport them back in time to February 2007 to see this production, but I could have them watch it via this uploaded, digitized version. So nobody really commented on the uses of these technologies in my evaluations, although several people talked about how they liked different media. And when I scratched the surface of that, different media also included the fact that we read poetry, we read a play, we read prose, we watched a film, and these other things that I used. But I can say that I received, for the first time in my life, with a very old technology, I received handwritten thank you notes from 2 students in the class. And in these handwritten thank you notes, both of them commented on the level of engagement they felt in the course, and in particular how engaging they found me. And so I think what I've taken from my experience of using technology in the classroom is that as long as it enables me to remain engaged and engage with my students and engaging to them and allows them to be engaged with the material, I'm going to continue to try. But as soon as I get any indication from them that it's not serving that function, I'm not going to use a particular technology. And I still think that we're at a point where we're not obliged to do it, that students still know how to learn without it. And I don't know what the future holds. So the second anecdote that's going to end my remarks actually comes from last night at about 8:45 p.m., so very recent, during which I was doing a small group analysis, which is something that the Center for Teaching does at the request of faculty members and TAs to come in and gather feedback from students about the class. So this particular professor in a very reading-intensive field had wondered about students' engagement with the reading. And this is a graduate class, by the way, I should probably say that. And so the very last question, which is, what could be changed in this class to increase your engagement with the reading? One student said out loud, get rid of electronic assignments. As a matter of fact, just get rid of all the electronic aspects of this course. And so I looked around and I said, is this something that the rest of you share? And everyone said yes, and one person said, it actually doesn't help us to build a community of discussion around the material. And so from this student's perspective, the goal of the course was to develop a community of discussion, and from all the students' perspective, the way that technology was being used in this particular class was not leading to that. So their comments confirm a conclusion that I have drawn from my own experience, is that when it gets in the way of engagement or learning, cut it out, but use it to the extent that it does facilitate those things.
Is it my turn?
It is.
You wanted me to go right there, Jay?
Yes.
It's really, I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, and I've got to say that Vanderbilt students are fantastic. It really is, and I can't remember who we were having a discussion with, might have been Jay and I at lunch yesterday. Is there a time where just the students themselves, because of the quality of students, come into this institution that they would naturally learn on their own without our aid as we go through the process? They're really an amazing group of students. I think you'll find my remarks are fairly congruous with Patricia's. And in the interest of full disclosure, two things. This is, because of my role, you might think I'm purely a technophile and I'm going to advocate for the saturation of technology at Vanderbilt. That's probably the farthest thing from the truth. One of the things that we went into the course that Jay and I developed as a brand new course and concept was that the technology should neither overshadow nor interfere with the learning. That everything it should be would be enhancement, augmentation, and aiding in the instruction. So that's hard to do. And the class that Jay and I constructed, I'm going to just enumerate some of the technologies that we used in the course of instruction and tell you a little bit about the course I'm teaching this semester. The other caveat is that I'm participating. I think I'm the tag. I've got an ear tag on right now from the Center for Teaching because I'm going through the teaching certificate program with Patricia and her colleagues, and they've been instrumental in helping me sort of structure my thinking and reflections on our experiences together. It's been a very good and beneficial process to me personally. With those two things said, we had a few learning objectives which I want to comment on, and Professor Clayton will go into more detail about those. But it's a freshman seminar, so the Worlds of Wordcraft was a freshman writing seminar. And the title and the hype around it sometimes gets lost, but that was one of our primary objectives. And the course was to improve the students' writing capability. And we also wanted to equip the students with a vocabulary that allowed them to be critical as it relates to their thinking when they observed a movie or read a book or had an interactive gaming experience. And Jay's going to talk through some of the media that we used to achieve that result. And then the other objective was to take a classic work, Spenser's The Fairy Queen, and then port that over into a 3D game space through a student design process where the students led the design, constructed the actual rules of the universe, and people then populated it with narrative that is purely derived from Spenser's work. And those are, I think, the three overarching objectives of the course. Now, how do we apply technology? I mean, technology was at the core of this, and I'm going to have to give you the laundry list so that we understand the depth and breadth of what we were doing in there. One is, I want to say this though too, chalkboards and chalk are technologies. Don't lose sight of that. We think technology, it's digital. So as Patricia said, you may need to get up and interact with a chalkboard. It's still a technology. Everything's about electrified technology today. So one of the things that are taken for granted, almost to the point of chalkboard taken for granted, is wireless access within the classroom, video projectors, DVDs, DVRs, I mean not DVRs at this point, but VCRs at this point. I think those are kind of almost a given that there will be some sort of audio-visual stack where you can death by PowerPoint your students. And that capability exists. We started introducing the use of a smart board into the classroom experience, which is an interactive chalkboard. Allows you to go up, write your lectures on the board, extend the board, so you can have 800 pages of lecture notes captured and then saved. So we were using the smart board extensively. We had a document imager in the classroom where we could take Lord of the Rings, one of the books from the Lord of the Rings, for example, or Neil Stevenson, place it on the viewer, project it over to our audiovisual stack, but there's a little bit more to it. We can have that document imager interfacing in with our smart board to actually annotate, capture, modify, and juxtapose multiple images from the internet, from the book, while the students interacted with that, and then save that interaction as a result, and then make it available for future dissemination. So that was an amazing experience there. Facebook we created a Facebook group, and that really helped us maintain contact with the students. So Oak is a very useful tool for administrative purposes, but Facebook we found is that's really the type of place where they live. Mm-hmm. If we want to interact with them, we don't use email, we don't use Oak, we use Facebook, and we got a great response. We can tell you about some events that we set up, some parties that we set up, homework assignments. It was very effective to create the Worlds of Wordcraft group in Facebook and then interact with our students in that space. YouTube. We used YouTube a lot. We were one of the first videos out there on YouTube University with our public affairs colleagues. We had not only used YouTube in terms of our publishing, but we used it in the context of we took material from YouTube and integrated it into the classroom experience. We also, in a controversial way, I think Jay will talk about, we use Wikipedia. I know it was all voluntary at first, but Dale has some anecdote to share around Wikipedia. It's a very useful application in the classroom. It provoked a lot of interesting debate, and it really gave them ready access to a lot of the things that we were discussing. And the thing about Wikipedia is that we're talking a lot about it in my course this semester. It's called Web 2.0, Beyond the One-Way Web. And the topic this week and the last 2 weeks in the course has been about disruption to traditional modes of thinking, whether it's getting a reference material. We did a comparison between Britannica and Wikipedia in terms of the quality of the entries. It's a great Nature article that discusses basic scientific entries that compares quality. We talked about how print and broadcasting are being disrupted by blogs. So this is the thing we're discussing topically in an engineering course, a computer science course right now, and it's been very beneficial for them to reflect upon how the blogs, which Professor Clayton and I use blogs in the context of the learning experience, which had some great learning benefit, is that it really did help increase the volume of writing in our seminars, and it helped them understand that, wait a second, and Jay will go through some of the statistics with you, you're writing for a mass audience. You have to be very circumspect when you're writing for a mass audience in ways that you weren't before. And that created a very safe environment for them to move their writing volume forward. We utilized Google Documents in this class as well for asynchronous and synchronous collaboration and peer review. Part of the requirements that Professor Clayton put down were to have peer-reviewed essays. There were our blogs to keep the writing volume moving at a weekly basis, and then there were substantial major essays that were facilitated through Google Documents. We have some varied and mixed experience on each of those that we'll share with you. Microsoft Live Spaces was a very big part of this discussion because they give away a free gigabyte of storage And what we were able to do is take classroom notes, for example, place the notes from every class or links that we discussed in class or books that we read in class and put it together on a live space so they had a ready reference of class supplemental materials immediately after the class, because the key thing to our classroom is that laptops are always on in this seminar. Now, not everything's amenable to that, but our experience was laptops are always on, so they were always interacting and we were always updating live. So we were kind of creating new knowledge and new knowledge structures during the course of the class. Microsoft Live Spaces was a great repository, and the reason why we're using free tools, we used WordPress, Microsoft Live Spaces, and Google Documents, is that we wanted to create a model that was easily replicated. Provisioning for these tools were very simple, and that any community college in the United States could benefit from the use and application of these tools in the way that we wanted to sort of set an example for it. Audio lecture capture and public dissemination, we had a tremendous amount of different and varied tools. For the actual dissemination piece, we used YouTube and iTunes University in conjunction with our public affairs folks. So every course lecture was captured, edited, massaged, and then placed into iTunes University. Neverwinter Nights, Lord of the Rings Online, that just really gets you started on the depth and breadth of the technologies that we used. What I want to caution everybody about is, and in my reflections for the Center of Teaching, which I'm sort of referencing here, there's different phases to it. Phase one was to reflect on some of the first kind of classroom experiences that I had. I went and assessed the efficacy from my perspective of each one. And overall, it's very effective. We did a similar survey, although we had them in October write a blog entry. What's your perception of the technology and the classroom? And on a ratio of 13-2, it was very positive. And this may be a self-selecting group of people who have a selection bias towards liking technology, would be one argument. But what we found coming into the course, and this is something for everyone to think about, all the educause you read, all the mass media and Newsweek, Time, and whatever, they think that this digital generation and digital natives, and I helped to discuss that. A lot of that's true. They grew up with the mouse in their hand, but they don't have the level of facility that everyone thinks with the technology. There is a great learning curve. There are many administrative, support, and technical hurdles that you will need to overcome in using these tools in the context of your classroom. So our, I guess, advice and counsel to be, use them judiciously, make sure that you have some degree of facility with the tools before you choose to introduce them to the classroom. Because if you need it to teach your course, the moment that you need it to teach your course, I can guarantee you it will not be there for you when you need it. This is the technology guy telling you that. So we believe in high availability, but the fact of the matter is, it's there. As a matter of fact, iTunes University, YouTube, Microsoft, what they giveth, they may one day taketh away from us. And it may not be as free as it is right now. So be thoughtful in your application of this. Apply the right tool to the right job. Many of them have differing and varying uses, and we can talk to the fact that it does require a great amount of administrative effort, support effort, and this is not, these digital natives don't have a native understanding of the way all these technologies work. I mean, some of these students were truly overwhelmed by what we were doing. And we got through it in an amazing way, and at the end of the semester, before I turn it over to Jay here, I want to make this very clear. We had 2 students unsolicited come back and make blog entries as to the effectiveness of the course without any solicitation. They were very pleased. They had a wonderful time. The funny thing is, and I don't know if this is a generalization here that may be kind of inappropriate aggregately, but it's my personal experience. Arts and sciences students were very interactive, very engaged in this Web 2.0 world, right? They were talking, they were chatting, they were engaged with us. When I got to the engineering school this semester and started working with the engineering students, I think I had like 4 drops after the first or second class, because I said, this isn't going to be education 1.0, it's 2.0, and you're going to participate. And Doug Schmidt, who's working with me on this, said, no. You stand up there and give them the information. I said, okay, I'm adaptive, I'll do that. But they warmed up now. They are much, the students that have stayed with me are warming up to it. But wow, what a difference between the 2 students that we have, our freshmen and these juniors, seniors, and grad students. Professor Clayton?
Great, thank you. Metz talked about the technological infrastructure that we used in this class. I want to talk about how the content of the class was affected by the technology. When I began thinking about our discussion today, the first thing that came into my mind was how much fun I had teaching that class. I had remarked to someone that it was the most fun I'd had teaching in 20 years, and then I realized, no, it was the most fun I ever had in a classroom. And I think that the pleasure that I was taking in the class has a relation to the pedagogical outcome of the class. First of all, I was experiencing the pleasure of discovery. I was not just discovering about how these technologies could work, because Matt and I were out on the edge. I mean, he has barely scratched the surface of the number of different technologies we were using simultaneously in this class. And so we were experimenting, we were testing which ones would work and which have drawbacks, and we plan to write up things that will discuss which ones are more effective than others. But it was the pleasure of discovering new things about literature that I had never seen before because of the way we were teaching it. And you always talk about the pleasure of learning from your students. This is one of the first times I ever understood that in a really deep way, that I was learning from the experience of teaching these students. It was the most participatory class I've ever been in my entire life, in 3 different institutions. The students were the most active, and they were participating in the creation of knowledge, the dissemination of knowledge, and the learning of knowledge in all kinds of ways, not just verbally, though the dialogue in the class was as active as I've ever seen a first-year seminar at Vanderbilt, but also visually. There was a great moment when we were trying to define a complicated literary term called remediation, which is to take something in one medium and put it into another medium. And the students were kind of rolling their eyes and saying, what does that mean? And at the height of discontent, the moment of, maybe I should say at the nadir of discontent, a student raised his hand and said, may I have control of one of the projectors? And we said, sure. And he goes, click, click, click. And his laptop, which he's had open to a wireless, seizes control of the LCD projector onto the screen. And boom, he plays a YouTube video by someone in Australia explaining what the term remediation means.
Wonderful.
And I mean, it just blew them away. I mean, they couldn't believe that somebody on YouTube would be taking seriously a term like remediation. So, it was just like case closed. I could shut my book. I didn't have to prove to them anymore that was a real word that people would care about. But I was also really worried going into this class about the non-canonical nature of the material we were teaching. All I could think of is what the parents of these first-year students were saying when they learned we were teaching their little children video games. They had spent their entire high school years trying to keep their children from playing video games, and they're paying Vanderbilt tuition to have us teach them about it. So I was, desperate to come up with a rationale for how they'd actually learn something from this class. So I was always paying attention to what they might be able to learn from this course. And there was a special challenge involved because we surveyed the 15 students, and not one of them was planning to be an English major. Furthermore, not one of them was planning to be a humanities major. So how was I going to teach about literature to these 15 non-believers? Well, pedagogy theorists, composition theorists have long talked about the advantages of using technology in terms of writing instruction. And so I don't even want to go over that. I mean, the literature's out there. People that know it better than I do, like Mark Walliger, my colleague here at Vanderbilt, can do an entire seminar on how pre-writing, peer review, establishing a sense of audience, revision process, all of those things are more effectively done using digital technologies. So, I was pretty confident that if nothing else worked in this class, at least we would be improving their writing. And we did. You're required to have 3 formal essays in a 115F class. We had 3 formal essays, which we peer reviewed and which we had conferences on in my office and required revisions and then resubmission, all the regular steps that you're familiar with from 115Fs. But in addition, we required them to write 10 blog entries, graded, over the course of the semester. So they were doing essentially, not quite weekly, actually it was weekly because we didn't start the blog up until about 3 weeks into the class. So, and that was less formal writing, but it was still writing for an audience. The first month of this freshman authored blog, the first month, it had over 2,000 hits from people around the world. And that sure gives you a sense that you're writing for an audience. Most freshmen, you say you've got to learn who your audience is, you've got to teach, but it's all abstraction to them. They don't believe you. They think you're the audience and that this is just something they have to get done with. But much more important was the literature content to me. And what I think we were enabled to teach in this class was new ways to think about narrative. The first thing we did was we made the point that all the online games that they're familiar with are sword and sorcery games that are derived directly from the era of Chaucer, of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and ultimately to Spencer. And so that was fairly effective. But much more interesting to me was the way that I could teach the fundamental building blocks of narrative theory to students via the technology in the classroom. Simple concepts that, in fact, you don't want to get much more difficult with non-humanities majors than these concepts I'm about to name. Simple concepts like point of view, character, space, and time came alive via the technology because we would talk about how an author would handle point of view and how a filmmaker would handle point of view, and then what it was like to be inside a virtual reality world where you were the center of the point of view. And we could teach it quite vividly because we would put up on the smart via the document imager on the smartboard the textual scene and read it together and have students standing up at the board annotating with markers the actual text with the students' comments on the text, which then we would save, capture, and publish to the web. Then we showed the same scene, the scene from Tolkien that we had just read. We showed the film version from Peter Jackson's movie on another board, keeping, we had 3 smart boards in this room. We were pumped. We were ready for action. So we had the Tolkien passage in print right there on one wall. We had the movie going on another wall. And then we had all 17 of us, the 2 teachers and the 15 students, enter the game at the scene that they had just read and seen and play it when they're the center of consciousness. And so think about how setting is handled differently in print, in film, and in a game. Think about what it means that you can turn 360 degrees and look around. I barely scratched the surface, but I think I got to jump ahead and say that all of these narrative theory terms that we explored in this class came together when we had the students construct their own virtual reality world. They built, using Neverwinter Nights platform, their own video game that's now out on the web. You could go play it right now, as soon as we get through, rush to your computer and you can play Spencer's Fairy Queen. And they built it. And we're going to be able to use that virtual world next year when we teach it and have more students contribute to it. So it's collaborative. It's a collaborative virtual world through time as well as in this year's group. But all the questions of what spatial dimensions, how does that affect narrative, came of use when they had to create a map of the world of Spencer's Fairy Queen. Now, Spencer's Fairy Queen is one of the most difficult works a college student will ever encounter. It's notorious as being a hard sell to undergraduates. That's why we chose it. We thought if we could make these students enjoy Spencer, if we could make Matt Hall learn to like Spencer, we
That was the test.
could do anything. And the students were going back, they were quoting passages from it, had a textual engagement that, frankly, I thought was impossible to achieve with an undergraduate audience. But I'll stop with this conclusion. We discovered through our research that there had never been an accurate map of Spencer's Fairy Queen published ever. And because the cues are so uncertain, scholars have tried like crazy to find original places in England that would map onto the action. And there's some correspondences, but there's a lot of contradictions. So there is no such thing as the fairy world until today. And the students mapped the action of the Fairy Queen
On the smartboard.
on the smartboard, and then they built it. Thank you.
So we can open it up now, not only for questions to the panelists, but also for observations and experiences that you may have had attempting to incorporate technologies in your classes and your different disciplines, or thoughts that you may have had about, limits that you feel in relation to certain kinds of technologies. The time component is sometimes a little bit daunting, learning how to use some of these technologies. And the kinds of concerns you might have around teaching with computerized digital technologies in your classes. We'd love to hear from you.
Those companies who produce
Talk as loud as you can.
those
Okay.
companies who produce and distribute computer games, that produce and distribute computer games, do they have any interest in courses like yours where you use all those programs?
Absolutely. I mean, there's grants available for
I
this.
assume you do not get any royalties.
Mm.
I assume that would be very interesting.
Matt and I are great proponents of open access and open source technology.
Absolutely.
And I imagine one could build and market this game. But as a matter of principle, we are much more interested in making it freely available. And this game that we've created will now, any teacher with a class anywhere in the world can enter this game and have his or her class play through 3 little scenes. That's all we've been able to build so far, 3 little scenes from the Fairy Queen.
And furthermore, it's available on SourceForge, so they can take it, modify it, distribute it themselves
That's right.
as well in an open manner. Professor Clayton and I did go out to a large game producer in San Diego a few years back, not so much to seek alliances, but to determine their interest in building open platforms. And these are commercial enterprises, and they've been hit up many times. They have no real interest in it. So we chose Neverwinter Nights particularly because it is an open platform for development. The only restriction, though, is that when you're using that, it's really sword and sorcery
Right.
type of genres you can approach, which is very appropriate to the Fairy Queen and Fairyland.
And it's why we chose Tolkien. I was saying the non-canonical nature of the material. Even Tolkien is not particularly a canonical author. And so, but the choice of Tolkien was dictated by that by the sword and sorcery elements in it. But Spencer has as many dragons and dwarves and trolls and knights as World of Warcraft does.
You know, apropos to the non-canonical nature of the content, did you hear earlier this week in NPR that I guess the Academy Awards now have a new category of Best Video Game Writer?
Guess what won it? Neverwinter Nights, the one we chose.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, I
we,
mean, there's argument for parents.
Well, it's just one of those things, it is what it is. People live there, but you know, the students, they use it as tools in the same way we use electricity. It's not worthy of, it is in many aspects worthy of exploration in terms of effectiveness of the technologies, but it's as common as a light switch to most people today, and they don't give it much more thought. They expect the technology to be available. And the question in terms of the ethics context for us, to what extent do we need to use technology in the classroom to help us meet them at their particular point of need, where they live? I think that's a very important question to consider, is you don't want to, by using solely traditional modes of, I am the fount of knowledge, they are the empty vessel, and they'll fill their coffers with our knowledge. How do you do that more effectively to align to the way in which they interact? I mean, the YouTube generation, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, right? That's your attention span. It went from probably hours to 45 minutes to 10 minutes. And I see, you know, I don't know if you've experienced it, but I've certainly experienced it. I have to hit a topic, leave it, come back to it. I keep them engaged in the dialogue along the way.
Building off this issue of meeting them where they are, and also just thinking about, at least in the past, discussions about digital divides along gender lines around certain kinds of technologies. What was the gender composition of your class, and do you feel like different kinds of technologies played out in different kinds of ways with learners whose gender socialization might have made them more likely to have used in the past certain technologies versus others?
we had 100% gender in our class.
All boys.
I was going to be ambiguous about which gender.
I'll be
Yes.
specific. I'm not.
We're not going to let that happen again, but it was a real shock to
We
us.
think, though, that, you know, to your point, the guys were sitting there on their keyboards, literally waiting like Ticketmaster to get this course. You know, and we were talking a lot about that. They were really waiting to get to the course. But I don't think, to your question, I talked to Monica Casper. We were talking about how we can utilize this and some of the things she does in sociology. And we were talking about Neverwinter Nights. She chose not to use it, one of her undergraduate students. We don't think there's, today, so much there's a bias because everybody's coming in on the same technology basis. And with technologies like the Wii and the new modes of human-computer interaction, the Wii in particular has broken down age and gender differences in playing these console games, which previously, if you look at some of the LAN parties Michael has been involved in, you'd see boys, boys, boys everywhere. But as DDR, Dance Dance Revolution, more interactive controllers come to bear, more and more people of various ages and genders are getting involved in the actual gaming experience.
You know what the male female ratio for World of Warcraft itself, or similarly large?
Not off the top of my head. World of Warcraft has 10 million subscribers right now. And I think you found that the gender variance, we've seen this a lot anecdotally, Jay and I, from all the different games that we've played together. Usually the females don't come into play until people in their late 30s, 40s, and 50s is what we've discovered. I can go back and find that if you send me an email. I've got access to that gender distribution. That seems about right, doesn't it? Yeah.
And since World of Warcraft is really the most kids-oriented of the bloody online games, it would be probably the most heavily male of the online games.
But that is changing.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing?
I don't see it as a bad thing. I think it's the more the merrier. The question is, are people dissipating their life sitting in front of the video games? There is the more important question than the gender distribution to me. And I see this with my kids at home, 8 and 9 years old, and a 16-year-old daughter. All three of them, I know individually have these anecdotes. Sarah's gaming is Facebook. It's social relations, who she's friends with, she's 16. the boys want to play games. I have to pull them out of the bloody house sometimes to get them to disengage from that world to connect with the real world. That's real to me. I don't know what sociologists aggregately study it, but it's real to me in my house. They've got to get engaged in the real world and not just, you know, interfacing with their computers. Because the real issue to me is the divisiveness of community that people, and Patricia alluded to this in terms of the commentary on the thread of discussions electronically. It gets them focused on this anonymous, disconnected interpersonal world, and we've got to bring them into a broader sense of community. I hope the Commons here in our residential experience helps to facilitate that, in addition to using these technologies as supplementary activities.
Go ahead, please. Why don't you say your name so we get to know who you are a little bit?
My name is Mutuku, and one question, or few of the questions I have is the fact that it's turning visual may be a hindrance to growing the imagination. For instance, growing up, we followed soccer games over the radio, and we knew exactly where the players are and what they look like, but you know, our power of imagination is so increased in that sense, whereas visual, so that's one concern I have. The other one is, it's not that you are engaged. The issue ought to be if your engagement is sustained, especially in a global world. We end up being a minority, really, because we have technology. The majority world doesn't have that sense. And so we end up projecting that mindset into the rest of the world, onto the rest of the world. So you see issues like, I'm just giving you these examples. You talk about Darfur. Okay, prior to that, you talk about Rwanda, but you don't remember Rwanda anymore. And then something else comes up, genital mutilation. You talk about that, slavery, and then you just keep on pieces, thinking along that line. So my concern is, how could we, in a classroom setting, encourage that sustained engagement, and also to increase, well, my assumption is that the fact that they have only 3 seconds attention span is not good. That's what I'm trying to say. The world is more, and life is more comprehensive than that. So I've been struggling with that in a classroom setting. I taught a seminar in education and change in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a huge topic. My primary concern was that they ought to read the text from scholarly literature so they don't stereotype Africa. I mean, Africa is probably the worst area where people have warped information. So I struggled in that respect to have them read the material so that we could discuss in class.
Well,
how do you respond to that?
in a classroom setting, I think I can recommend something, it sounds a little self-serving, that I did. I too am worried about that kind of episodic engagement. And the last day of my class, it has nothing to do with technology, I had queried them previous to that class about from their perspective, the one most important concept that they had learned in the class. So not a datum or a fact or a moment, but really asked them to name a concept. And of the 15 students who responded, I looked at where there was some sort of clustering around concepts or the concept I thought was a particularly interesting one for the class. And so then I, on the last day, then did a retrospective of the entire term and how, before we even knew that concept existed or that it had a name, we had already been exploring it and kind of reminding them how the first day of class and then the next week and the next week we had kind of been creating not a narrative, but a complex set of understandings around this concept. And, just as is my way, blithely suggested that they might consider doing this for other concepts for the class. And lo and behold, I presented another one on the final exam, and they had to do that same kind of synthetic view, making references to different texts, different media, different things we had used. So from a pedagogical standpoint, what I tried to do is to help them understand that from my perspective, the education that the learning that had taken place in the class was not at the level of details or facts or instances, but was more conceptual, was more global, if you was more synthetic. And to really hit hard with them that that's what contributes to expertise in a field, is not knowing disparate facts, but being able to restructure information and knowledge. And all I can hope is that other faculty members do the same thing, so that our students leave being in the habit of mind of doing that kind of knowledge construction or reconstruction for themselves. I can't do it all by myself in my class, and don't presume that I do, but I hope that it's part of a larger initiative on all of our parts to get students to think in this way.
Well, I don't want to seem so alarmist about this declining attention span. First of all, I think the students today have incredible cognitive capability. I grew up in a world where there was ABC, CBS, Washington Post, New York Times, right? So the theory is there's too many channels, too many sources of information, no credible editorial process in the world. And to the point about, do they float from issue to issue to issue to issue without any discerning, thoughtful concern about an issue? That seems to be more of a function of editorial cycles in the news and in the mass media than actually the students driving that. I mean, the blogs, and you see a lot of this in the journalism discussions, the blog factor. Blogs are growing, blog entries grow 1 million a day. And so the blogs have placed this tremendous pressure on media to be more immediate and in turn respond with less editorial capability. Matter of fact, HBO has a great series called The Wire, which really deals with this around the Baltimore Sun and the compression of editorial time, the staff reduction in the face of internet, changing these technologies. That's what we're exploring in our lecture right now. I think it shouldn't also be said that if their attention span is 10 minutes because of that editorial response in society, we can give them a semester's worth of work. Instead of 45-minute increments, we probably need to do it in 10 and just restructure the way in which we present our information. That would be the only consideration I would offer, because looking at blogs' effect on the New York Times readership, for example, in 05 and 06, and subsequently 07, I think the Newspaper Association of America talked about readership time on the New York Times, for example. It's like up to 42 minutes people are staying with that site to read the New York Times. So NAA.org is a good site about those sort of trends. And also Pew Internet Life Studies, another good one that talks about these issues.
I'd like to just say one word about Motoku's point about the visual stifling the imagination. I don't know if that's true or not, but Spencer is a great test case because he's an extraordinarily non-visual poet. I said, okay, we're designing the plane where the opening joust occurs. How did he describe it? They're all rustling through their books like crazy to find it. And I said, well, really vividly,
Yes.
he pricked across the plane. So they had to visualize it. And so, you may be right that the visual media reduces imagination, but this experiment in particular forced them to use their constructive imagination in response to a text. So it got them focusing very minutely on a text and then expansively creating out of their own imagination what this place was going to look like.
I'm Jerry Goddard from the School of Medicine. I was thinking of the variety of ways we've introduced technology into the medical school program, and I'd like to at least start with one of them that I think picks up something that Patricia commented on. We have a program called the Emphasis Program where students spend the first semester of the year as part of their curriculum being introduced to 9 areas in which they can potentially select an area with which they will work with a faculty mentor on a scholarly research project. they'll carry that out during the summer between their first and second year and complete it during their second year. During the first semester, each of the areas are asked to give a presentation about, and the areas are things like laboratory-based research, clinical research, the humanities, law and medicine, medical education. There are 9 of those. And each area is asked to make a presentation on what they consider so-called enduring understandings, what are the key concepts that they like all medical students to understand about that area, and also to give a brief introduction as to the possible projects that students might work on. What we started to do is that's the context. The background is that there's a lot of research that indicates that reflection, while reflection on one's education, and particularly reflection on one's practice as a physician, enhances one's ability to learn, one's ability to maintain one's competence as a physician. So the goal then was to, how do we stimulate the patterns of thinking and the attitudes that develop this introspective reflection on what they're learning and what they're doing. So as part of this emphasis program in the fall, we had the students, by way of a web, internally developed web program, respond to 2 very simple questions of stimulating reflection on each of these 9 presentations. So they were asked to respond to, well, what did you learn? What were the key messages that you got from that presentation? And what are potential scholarly projects or research projects that you might develop for yourself that might interest you from what you heard about that area? They were asked to just write 2 or 3 sentences that then went to a faculty advisor who was expected to respond to those reflections. It turned out that most of the students didn't write 2 or 3 sentences, but they wrote a full, extensive summary of what they had heard, and very thoughtful introspections. And so I think the technology, it clearly could have been done with paper and an advisory process, one week to the next. It was interesting, the first year we did it, it wasn't quite as successful because we were asking students to make reflections on on what they had learned and what they thought. The second year, we said, write a blog on what you had learned, and it was immensely successful. It's interesting in terms of the students, they were uncomfortable with reflection, they were very comfortable with being asked to make a blog.
And I would throw out that they probably very likely wrote more than if they had been telling you face to face, or if they had to write down. It probably facilitated the complexity of
to sit and reflect while you're writing led to more in-depth analysis.
Did they share those with each other too?
Pardon me?
Did the students share their blogs with each other too?
They had that opportunity to, but we wanted the students to be able to share some of their internal thinking with the advisor. So that it was only went to their one advisor. They were not public, but obviously they could share what they had written.
Jay, you had an experience too of enormous increase in volume of writing, as I recall in our earlier discussions that might be relevant to that point, that your students wrote much more.
Well, they certainly did. I mean, just the 10 blogs. There's a course at Yale that's kind of notorious and famous for, called Daily Themes, and this is. And you have to be a real glutton for punishment to take that course there. And it's a very small selected group that does that. But I think that the volume of writing we were achieving via use of blogs approach that volume. And it has to be supplemented with formal writing. You can't let blogs be the only kind of writing, because that's, they're not going to learn anything about how to put an argument together or how to use evidence to support a claim. So
Which is why they were balanced with the critical essay
that's right.
process.
That's right.
And on that score, I can make reference to the experience of another faculty member here, Peggy Secha-Eilers in German department, who used a MOO. Michael, Matt, what does MOO stand for?
Multi-user dungeon object oriented.
So basically students in her German class, an upper level German class, I think actually 201, so the same level, maybe slightly higher, created these virtual worlds and virtual personae or avatars, and had to communicate with one another in this virtual world in German, and of course had to type it in order to communicate. And she ended up printing out everything and bound it to show them how much they had written in German, which was just, 10 times, 12 times, 15 times as much as if they had done it in another format, and a lot less self-consciously. Those of you who've had, I'm going to say, the pleasure of teaching writing in a foreign language know that students are extremely self-conscious about their written language skills, their oral language skills. And this MOO completely eliminated that sense of self-consciousness because there was a point to it. They really needed to communicate. They needed to tell something about themselves. They needed to tell somebody how to get to where they were. And so so suddenly they had a reason to be writing other than, oh, it's for this assignment and it's gonna be stupid anyway because I can't use the language. So she really found it to be extraordinarily helpful in getting her students in a foreign language to write a lot more and a lot more freely than they would have otherwise.
Let me extend that point, but take it a little bit oblique angle here. Simulation and visualization is something we didn't talk about in the course, particularly when you're looking at medicine. There are many simulators on the cardiovascular system. The nursing school, I know, has simulated patients that you can administer various CPR, other treatments to. The Army, for example, has a anti-tank missile called the Javelin. I'm reading a kind of a history of Iraq II right now from a Green Beret's perspective, and he talks about in Fort Bragg, to fire one of these missiles costs $78,000 per shot. They have extensive simulators at Fort Bragg to train people how to use the command module and do that. Flight simulation is another example. So there's many ways to use simulation. Those are sort of competency-based outcomes in your learning, but equally in terms of visualization, Jared Smith in structural biology has 3D visualization with 3D glasses in his lab in Stevenson of protein structures and DNA strands and so forth. Those are very interesting to look at. Professor Klain and I, during the Borges discussions, we were talking about cathedrals at some point. And one of the games we use is called Dark Age of Camelot, which has wonderfully you probably want to take it from here. Okay. He's putting me on the spot. They have these things are so well designed. So we went out to Google and pulled all these images in, and I said, well, why don't we walk through the cathedral? And I had taken a screenshot of this cathedral in the city of Camelot that's in a game. And the students had thought that was a picture of an actual cathedral. So when we went to the game and had our little guys walk through the cathedral, they were astonished that, wow, this is a 3D rendering of something we virtually saw in Google. And they were to look at that architecture, see what it looked like, and able to get up close and personal spatially, not just from one perspective, but they were able to extend their perspective and take a virtual tour of a 3D cathedral. So simulation and visualization is another angle that you can consider, with the caveat that any of this will take a great deal of overhead and preparation and administration. So don't go over the top when you move out there. I'd also like to add that if you go to YouTube, Jay and I have put together a masterful, well-edited, wonderfully scripted YouTube video. He's laughing for a reason. It's got narrative. If you search on the terms narrative forms in the digital classroom, it just gives you an overview of some of these topics we've discussed in a little bit more depth, and we'd be happy to talk to anybody individually if you want to see, it's like, how do I visualize this? We can show you, just set up a time and we'll show you some of this.
The YouTube video is about the classroom. And so we walk through each piece of technology.
Masterfully scripted.
And it's the most clumsy, stumbling video out there on YouTube. It's very
Great
embarrassing.
narrator.
Very embarrassing. And it's been watched 32,000 times. So, you know, I will say it was my least polished performance as a public speaker of my lifetime, really.
And watched it
And it's
32
the most watched piece of public speaking.
Which is another thing, is when lecture capture takes a lot out of you. Smoker's behind the camera. I should pull him over here and have him talk about it with me. It is a great deal of editing. So this device he has here, Public Affairs recommended that I get one. This is what we used in our classroom. Then Brian, the guy behind the camera, I should make him come around the camera, he introduced me to this Olympus DS30 here. This is a $150 device. This is how I do my audio capture. So every day now, this semester, I capture it here. Unedited, I put my lecture out in my Microsoft Live spaces. Takes up 35 megabytes for a little over an hour and 15 minutes. And that accompanied with my PowerPoint is about 10 megabytes. So every day I'm generating, in the context of a class, 35 plus 10, 45, 50 megabytes per day. Work the math, 2 lectures, 14 weeks, so forth. You can get it's you know, you're almost at half a gigabyte. We were talking about this last night, Senator, right? Half a gig of storage from one audio capture lecture, which goes up dramatically. Brian, I have to tell you what the video looks like when you do that. So storage is also something that if you, where are you going to put the stuff that you capture digitally is going to be of concern to you and your students, which is why I'm trying to leverage these free tools.
And I will tell my students for some of the things that I did, I said, you need to go to a networked computer, don't do this from your dorm room. It's going to be slow, it's going to crash, and so I really had to give them that caveat in terms of using, particularly the Opera that was up. It was a huge, huge file.
The woman next to you was going to.
Oh, I mean, some of the questions that I had actually were already answered by you, Patricia, were talking about like the particular use that someone could make of a move for language instruction, for instance. Because one of the things that when you gave this wonderful list of all of these things is I have come across the sort of issue of how do I know which technology is going to be the best one for this task that I want to do in my classroom. So I've asked students this because it's like this is the only way that I know how to get this information. So I asked them, you know, would it be better if I set up a Facebook thing and then I would communicate with you like that? And they all said categorically no in my class, and so I said, okay, we'll move on from there. But they also all say that they never check Blackboard unless they have to, which means that's one of the reasons why in one class this semester it's not working to create a virtual community in the way it did perhaps previously. So I think this is individual groups of students respond to these technologies in different ways, but also I just wanted to ask that question broadly to all of you is what's the best way to determine which one of these modes is, you know, best suited for a particular task that you want to perform pedagogically?
Ask Matt. That's always the answer you say. You ask Matt.
I'm going to say a lot of it's trial and error, which is my mode in teaching regardless. Any of us who've written assignments that we'll never use again because the papers we got were so bad, or an exam question that we retire after one use because who knew that it was going to yield that kind of idiocy? It's I think the problem is that with technology there may be a greater startup cost. So you feel like you've put all of this effort into trying something and then it doesn't work. So I think you have to do real cost-benefit analysis about how much of your time you're willing to devote to something that you may never be able to use again because, or I wouldn't say from one sample you should say you should never use it again, but you may use it 2 or 3 times with 2 or 3 different groups of students and find it's just not going to work, and then
You do have to experiment. Professor Clayton and I learned through Class Revolt blog grading techniques. We need to, in terms of the assessment component of it, as you ask them to write a blog, it's not just which technologies to apply, but it's how to apply the technology, how to communicate your expectation about the use of the technology, And then, to the point where at the end, it was not until the end of the semester where we were able to say, let me write the story to give you the example of how not to write a good blog. And here are the elements that constitute a poor entry, which I've benefited now in this class. I was able to tell them up front, here's a little bit clearer expectation of the use of this technology, its appropriateness. On Facebook, based upon the traffic we see in and out of Vanderbilt and based upon its proliferation in society, I think you have an anomaly if that's the case, because most people are very much wired into.
No, I have an explanation for why they said that.
Yeah.
They thought you were asking if you could friend them. And they don't want you in, they don't want you in their personal life and vice
Very well
versa.
could be the case.
So if you introduce it, you need to say, I'm setting up a Facebook group for this class. That doesn't mean I want you to friend me.
Many of them will, but.
We're just going to have a group that we can have threaded discussions in, and class announcements can go out to.
That's a great
And it works like, it works like a charm. And they'll use it to communicate with you all constantly.
And downstream from that, the semester previous, Professor Clayton sent a message to that Facebook group, was still maintaining some continuity of contact.
That's right.
Afterwards, because he wanted to reiterate the fact that their blogs are still active and that their hits are going up, even though their class is concluded that journey together. The groups do work better. I think that's probably it, Jay.
Yeah.
I don't know about the rest of you, but I get into a thing where, because I have a limited amount of time, I don't know whether to put my time toward improving my understanding of, a specific body of literature that I may want to increase my expertise in, or whether I should spend my time improving my expertise in the kinds of technology that will deliver, the kinds of scholarly interest and so on that I want to communicate to my students. And I think that's a real cost-benefit analysis, once again, that you have to go through. I was also going to say that it's probably a good thing for us to start lobbying our administrations to provide us with extra funds, like during the summer or something, to enable us to experiment in these ways, because otherwise, in order to this is an added thing that we've got to do. In addition to have the expertise of our area, we've got to have a certain kind of technological expertise. And again, it's a matter of time allocation and finite time allocation.
I'd like to comment on that. Is that okay?
Sure.
And I think as part of that cost-benefit analysis is your enjoyment of it. Clearly, Jay loves trying to figure these things out. He foregrounded his pleasure in the classroom. I do not experience that same pleasure when working with these technologies. And I think my students sense that. And it has an impact on how well it goes. So I think you also need to be mindful of your own self and using these things. And I want to encourage you to be your own self in the classroom and not somebody else, and what you think that person should want to do. So I think that's a lot of it too. And the anecdote I was going to end with, that I'll tell very briefly until I had this one from last night, is I was recently with my 5-year-old nephew who wanted to use these little cards that have questions. There's a question, there's 4 answers, and you have to pick the right one. And they're for kindergarten, or for first graders, second graders, third graders, fourth graders, fifth graders. And his sisters had this little, I'm going to call it a gizmo or contraption that you could plug it into and it could tell you whether the answer was right. Well, clearly we didn't know how to use this technology because it was showing that we were always getting the answer right regardless of what we said. And so I just looked at him and I said, you know what, I think it's going to be okay. I think that I know the answers to all of these questions. And he said, well, that may be true for the kindergarten set, but are you sure it is for the 5th grade set? And I said, I'm pretty sure that I will know all the answers, but when I don't, I'll know that I don't, and we can go look on the computer. He would not sit down and look at those cards with me until we got one of his sisters to actually show us how to use the contraption properly. And once we did that, he was fine, and we did it for about a half an hour, 45 minutes. And so I remember thinking, okay, this is your future college student, Patricia, who will not pay attention to you and will not pay attention to your expertise that I asserted with a great deal of authority and certainty until we had the computer thing working. And so I thought, make note, Patricia, the day will
It's a
come.
boredom thing. He knew how to work his ant. He did not know.
Well said. So that was the anecdote I was going to tell before, and now I've told it.
Just to build off, I think, what you were saying, Susan, and also some things that you all have said, maybe another answer to your question as well is to learn from what others have done. So experiment, trial and error, but not in isolation.
Right.
So thus the power of publishing your lectures, of having a YouTube video, clumsy though it may be, talking about how you've done what you've done. And the Center for Teaching over the years has tried to figure out ways to, as technology intersects with teaching, to disseminate and to fund experiments. One of the struggles that we've had is the infrastructure and the scope of when you get into that business, then where does pedagogy end and infrastructure and support begin? I'd love to hear, and I know, Jay, you've advocated on behalf of graduate students for there to be much more robust technology support and development programs. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, maybe especially Matt, from an infrastructure institutional perspective on what you'd like to see happen around the infrastructure questions, what role funding from, say, a Center for Teaching, a Center for Ethics could play in that, given that there's such a decentralized approach to technology and instructional technology in particular. That may be too big of a question to
That's
ask.
a huge question, and it's a lot of dimensions, but.
It's an elephant in the living room for me as I sit here and hear these great stories.
But we've done a lot with it. Look at Smokler back there on the camera. Between Public Affairs and ITS, we've established a partnership, and we do not want to overinvest. The number one thing about technology today is that what I tell people when I go through my technology discussions. I come from Bank of America most recently prior to this. Huge technology investments, centralized control, standards, and so forth. What a shock coming here, right? And you know, Michael, he ran away from me when he took a new job as a result of that. You know, we don't want to invest a lot at the center. I think the goal for us, and this is where Jay and I benefit, do experimental, what we would call centers of excellence. We have this experimental classroom conferencing facility where you can do video conferencing, you have smart boards, all this pedagogical support equipment. In that conference room, anybody can come in, schedule it, and use it, as Jay and I did for our class. We have some support staff to help. You know, we have a capacity to stream videos. There was not a great faculty demand for videos. When I arrived here, we were streaming one event per year out of ITS. Now we're doing about 30 a month.
Wow.
Okay, and that number's only growing, particularly if you watch the library's partnership with NBC News for live streaming of the news archive. These digital distribution of content's only going to rise. Our goal in ITS is to have a hot bed of support knowledge so that as your graduate students and your distributed support come and go, you'll have someone to rely on. But for example, the streaming capability, the VBRIC, we're going to have a certain capacity we'll keep warm at the center, judiciously managed, and have some staff that's always there to support it. But at the same time, we don't want to control it and drive volume to the center. So we say, here's a good solution we found. We think it works, and people like Jay and I tested in real life. And we gave the blueprint, for example, to the baseball team and said, hey guys, you want to broadcast your baseball events on the internet? Lovely. We don't really want to do that because we're serving a broad community. You have a narrow community with high volume. Here's how you do it. Go forth and enjoy, but always with the knowledge that since if you use what we're supporting, you'll have someone there to help you with support issues over time. But what I don't want to see happen, and I see there's some pockets that want to see this, is let's create 60 staff to support editing YouTube videos. That should be more distributed and diffused in an appropriate area. I'm not saying ETOB, I'm not saying this kind of stuff, guys, but it really needs to be as close to the unit and school as possible to meet that local need. When we'll provide as much central support as we can, but we don't want to bulk up our staff too much. Because our focus really is about network transport, information security, and those core shared capabilities throughout the institution. Did that answer?
Applying to ITS necessarily should be, the answer to the kind of instructional technology support.
But it's partnerships that really work well in disseminating the how-to.
Well, it's about 2 o'clock, so I invite any of you who might have questions for our panelists panelists to approach them right after the session. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming, and hope
Thank
will
you.
come to our future programs.
That was a lot of fun.